promotes and demote content based on its level of Canadianness. Now, last week I asked the Prime Minister if he thought the film Ultimate Gretzky fit within this category of Canadian. He seemed to think so, and of course, most Canadians would also think so. I mean, after all, it's a film about a famous Canadian. It's largely filmed in Canada. But surprisingly, no, it's not. It's not Canadian. Doesn't make the cut. Odd. So, under Bill C-10, what exactly will make the cut, Mr. Prime Minister?
I just want to remind the honourable members to place their questions through the Speaker, not directly to each other. The honourable Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-10 aims to level the playing field between creators and web giants. It requires big, powerful foreign streamers to provide information on their revenues in Canada, financially contribute to Canadian stories and music, and make it easier for individuals to discover our culture. That is part of what this government has always stood for, to defend Canadian creators, to defend Canadian content, to promote it the same way Canada has for decades, ensuring that there is a Canadian proportion on radio shows, on TV networks. It's something we've always done to protect Canadians and culture, and we will continue to.
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
Here. It's clear the Prime Minister just has zero clue as to what is in this bill and the consequences that it will have for creators in Canada. Right. Let's just try another one. Again, we're just having fun here. Canadian Bacon. It's a movie featuring all things Canada, stars our very own John Candy, a famous actor from Canada. Just curious, does the Prime Minister think that Canadian Bacon makes the cut?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I remember well that movie filled with quite horrible stereotypes about Canadians and Americans, and I won't pronounce on it because, you know what? We have a CRTC and we have a system that has established very clear rules in order to protect Canadian content, Canadian creators. Over the years, many artists have been able to succeed because Canadian radio plays a percentage of Canadian music, because Canadian networks have to put forward Canadian shows. It's something we've done to create a Canadian media and content creator industry in this country. We will continue to do that even into a more digital era.
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
I'm not sure that it gets easier than this. I mean, I'm just asking some simple Canadian cultural questions to a Prime Minister who wants to protect Canadian culture. So I thought this was going to be pretty simple, but he's right. It's not considered Canadian content, which is interesting. Now, this is important because under Bill C-10, this government will instruct the CRTC to regulate what is Canadian and what is not, what makes the cut and what is out. Now, under the current stipulation, as we've explored, Ultimate Gretzky doesn't make it. Canadian Bacon doesn't count. So again, what is Canadian enough to make the cut under Bill C-10?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It's interesting because now we're seeing the Conservatives go into an area where we've long suspected them of wanting to go. That idea that we shouldn't be supporting and protecting Canadian culture, that we shouldn't be ensuring that Canadian artists can succeed, particularly faced with the extraordinary weight of the American cultural industry. Canadians, certain Conservative Canadians are no doubt frustrated that Canadian radio stations always play about 1/3 Canadian content, that Canadian TV networks have to put forward Canadian content. It's something that has created and supported Canadian artists. To
improve the lives of these children.
For Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear the government has failed to protect national security. It granted a scientist from China's military, Fei Yuyan of the People's Liberation Army, access to its Level 4 Winnipeg lab, where the world's most dangerous viruses and pathogens are handled. How did this individual get access to the lab, and will the Prime Minister ensure that no scientist from China's military is granted access again in the future?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take very seriously the responsibilities around national security, which is why we work very closely with national security organizations like CSIS and the Communications Security Establishment to ensure that people are protected and that people who have the proper security clearances are the right people indeed. I cannot comment specifically on these individuals in question, but I can assure you that every step of the way this government has and always will take national security with utmost importance.
Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to comply with 2 orders from committee asking for the production of documents related to this matter. Orders that he himself supported while he was in opposition that he now opposes. The Prime Minister is accountable to this House. He came to office promising greater democratic oversight, promising open and accountable government. When will he respect this House and its committees and deliver the documents we are asking for related to these national security breaches at the Winnipeg lab?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I find that a little rich, Mr. Speaker, coming from a member of the former government that refused to bring in national security oversight with a committee of parliamentarians, which is exactly what we did. That wasn't there when I was in opposition under a conservative government. That's why we brought in the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians that has the security clearances, that is able to look into issues of the highest delicacy, of the highest national security. There are 2 outstanding members on that committee from the Conservative Party, and we certainly hope that all parliamentarians will be able to look into these matters.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the National Security and Intelligence Committee is accountable to the Prime Minister, not the other way around. He appoints the members of that committee, and they serve at his pleasure. He can block information to the committee, block its reports. When will the Prime Minister be accountable to this House and deliver the documents that we have been asking for? And when will he commit to cooperate with the U.S. investigation about the origins of the coronavirus that President Biden has ordered last week and ensure that government scientists in Winnipeg and their documents, including lab notes, are made available to U.S. investigators?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We can all agree that national security issues should be dealt with by parliamentarians through the appropriate venue. This is exactly the kind of thing that the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians was created for. They should examine these issues. We created NSI-COP to allow for proper scrutiny of national security issues by parliamentarians from all parties. In regards to the Biden government's announcement on investigations, we will, of course, completely support them. It's important to get the truth of the matter.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, we all recognize on this side of the House that asking questions about Communist China and the pandemic is quite unfortunate, but it is essential. When we asked questions to the Prime Minister last week on this, the Prime Minister called us racist. It's beneath a Prime Minister to act like that. The next day, the President of the United States launched an investigation by his intelligence services into the origins of the pandemic, and he said, and I quote, as part of that report, I have asked for areas of further inquiry that may be required, including specific questions for China. Does the Prime Minister believe that the President is racist for asking questions about China? Is Biden a racist? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have asked for better answers from the international community and from China on the origins of this pandemic. We are working with our allies. We are working with the United States. We will continue to demand that the World Health Organization continues to investigate further to really understand what has happened, who is responsible, and how we can, above all, prevent this from happening in the future. We will always be there to ask those difficult questions. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. That's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister responds to difficult questions, but essential ones concerned what happened at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. A researcher with ties to the Chinese military got a security clearance and worked in the lab. Deadly viruses were sent from Winnipeg to Wuhan in Communist China. After this shipment, 2 researchers who worked in Winnipeg were escorted out of the lab by the RCMP. Is the Prime Minister prepared to get to the bottom of the issue? It's essential for our national safety, security, yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we've already said, these two individuals are no longer working at the Public Health Agency of Canada. We cannot make a comment due to privacy concerns and our obligations, but parliamentarians must be able to do a follow-up and ask questions, even on questions that are quite sensitive when it comes to national security. That is why we created a special committee of parliamentarians that will have and has the ability to look at all of the elements, including the most sensitive issues. I recommend the member use that committee of parliamentarians in order to do a follow-up. That is what it's for. The honourable member for Louis Saint-Laurent. It's interesting to see that the Prime Minister is saying we can't talk about it because the two individuals lost their jobs in Winnipeg, but that's why, Mr. Speaker, we're asking the questions. We want to know why these people were escorted out by the RCMP when they left. And Mr. Speaker, these are sensitive but essential questions. Once again, can the Prime Minister at least commit to, in the future, no one with any ties to the Communist Party or the Chinese military will have the level 4 security clearance? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We are all in agreement to say that parliamentarians should be able to debate issues of national security where it is appropriate to do so. That is exactly why the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, the NSI-COP, was created. It should be able to look at this issue. We have created the committee so parliamentarians from all parties can examine issues of national security, including two excellent members of the Conservative Party of Canada who are doing important work on that committee. Thank you. The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, everybody in Quebec was disgusted to learn that the gluttons Canada to explain itself.
Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Today, the Canada-China Committee received more illegally redacted documents from this government. They also got a letter from the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada that included the government talking points. Canadians don't want talking points. They deserve answers. Why are they getting more black ink and more whiteout from this government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we can all agree that parliamentarians deserve to be able to look into all sorts of different facets of what the government does, including and particularly around issues of national security. When I was in opposition, Mr. Speaker, we weren't able to do that because the Conservative government had a secretive approach that refused any sort of oversight, which is why we brought in the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians that would allow parliamentarians from all parties to get the kinds of clearances involved to be able to follow up. That is the right venue for that level of transparency, and we hope that parliamentarians will use it.
Well, member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Canadians send us here to get accountability from the government, and the Prime Minister is very careful in his words. That's a committee of parliamentarians, not a committee of Parliament. A committee of Parliament has legally ordered those documents that this government even saw fit to redact the lines for the media that were included in the package today. That's how far these Liberals will go to hide the truth from Canadians. So is the Prime Minister going to be voting today for the motion to have the documents handed over to the committee, or is he going to continue his cover-up?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, these issues have come up. They came up many times when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, because on issues of national security, there was very little accountability, there was no oversight, there was no transparency. So we created a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians on which seat members from all different parties who are given security clearances so that they can can look into the most sensitive issues around national security, and they have done extraordinary jobs and put out many important reports, and that is exactly the way for all parties to get accountability and insight.
The honourable member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It doesn't sound like openness by default like this government promised us. It sounds like the Prime Minister should be charging Stephen Harper rent for living inside his head for the last 6 years. The documents show that this government refuses to answer very simple questions. We know that Dr. Fei Hu Yan was a Chinese national associated with the Chinese military. We know the students that were escorted from the lab were also reported to be Chinese nationals. Why is it that the passport of the two scientists that were walked out all of a sudden a national security concern?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we all understand that there are certain elements that confirm that are of a level of national security interest, and governments deal with those around the world all the time. What Canada has finally done since 2015 is equip itself with the same kinds of oversight by elected parliamentarians that other countries have long had. We looked at the ways that the UK and the US and others handle sensitive national security issues, and we created a national security organization, committee of parliamentarians to do just that. That is the oversight that we have provided.
The honourable member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Again, Speaker, allow me to educate the Prime Minister. The UK uses a committee of Parliament, not a committee made up of parliamentarians that reports only to the Prime Minister. Let me offer a quote from the Chief of Special Pathogens at the lab in Winnipeg. Quote, historically, it's also been easier to obtain material from us as opposed to US labs. Well, don't worry. He's only talking about why China would ask Canada for the Ebola virus. This government's approach to China from the beginning has been incredibly naive. Is all that black ink just covering up this government's biggest national security failure?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, issues of national security are of utmost importance to all Canadians, and that's why they elect parliamentarians to hold governments to account. But on the issues of national security, it is important that there be higher levels of clearance given to parliamentarians who can properly dig into it and ask all the right questions. That is why we move forward on creating a national security committee of parliamentarians so that they can do the excellent work that they have been doing over the past many years, including with outstanding representation from the Conservative Party of Canada on that committee.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Today, the United Nations is calling for investigations into the deaths of Indigenous students at residential schools. Maybe because the United Nations doesn't have confidence in...
Don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe, and comment. Safe Space Cafe. And always,